Welcome to the Water Channel podcast, a series of conversations on water, food and agriculture. We feature stories and insights that are defining our present and are shaping our future. I am Abraham Abhishek.
And I am Jean Patrici.
Jean, as we mentioned in the intro, this podcast is about water, agriculture and climate, the basic things of life. So why are we talking about rats and mice today?
Well, just like any other agricultural pests, rodents are really reducing agricultural efficiency. And in a time when we're trying to make the most of every drop of water and every gram of fertilizer, rodent pests definitely deserve a bit of attention.
Yeah, but how big a problem is it really? I mean, when was the last time you heard on the news that rats ate up a bunch of harvest or standing crops?
Yeah, exactly, Abraham. It's a huge issue that's just not getting the attention it deserves. As our guest today will explain, the damage these little mammals are causing is unbelievably huge, not just in terms of agricultural damage, but ecologically and in terms of our health too.
So who's our guest today?
Dr. Meheretu Yonas. He's a leading expert on rodent ecology based in Ethiopia. He's one of the proponents in Ethiopia leading the charge for ecologically addressing the devastating rodent problem there.
Hi Meheretu, good morning. Thanks a lot for joining us on the podcast. When we say rodents, we usually have rats and mice in our mind. Is that it, or are there many different kinds of rodents?
Yeah, so rodents are one of the biggest group of mammals, and they are quite diverse, even though people perceive only rats and mice as rodents. But the group taxonomically it includes, in addition to rats and mice, mammals like squirrels, even porcupines and beavers, and so on. So they are really a very diverse group of animals. And one of the major characteristics of differentiating rodents from other group of mammals is the fact that they have upper and lower incisors, which are growing constantly. So in other animals, you don't notice that kind of constant growth of upper and lower incisors constantly. And that's why they have to chew or gnaw throughout their life. Because if they don't do that, and the incisors, they continue growing, and it will prevent them from using their teeth for eating. So that's a gnawing behavior. And in terms of size and weights, like the smallest rats are maybe 5 to 7 grams, as small as 5 to 7 grams, and the larger ones are up to 35 kilogram. Like the capybara, for instance, is also part of the rodent group.
And of all these different varieties, sizes and shapes, which are the ones found in Ethiopia?
Ethiopia is one of the high rodent biodiversity countries in Africa, I think in the world as well, because there are about more than 100 species. I think the last record we made in 2019, we have about 104 different species. But remember, some parts of Ethiopia have not been explored, like Afar, Somali region, Benshangul, even in southern Omo. These areas have not been studied. So we expect when these areas are accessible and scientific research continues, the number of species will increase, definitely.
That's really interesting. You mentioned that they are a really diverse group. And of course, Ethiopia is a hotspot for them. But do they naturally occur on all the continents? I know we have them in Europe. You mentioned the capybara in South America. Of course, Ethiopia is in Africa. Are they everywhere?
Yes, I think, just like some people say, it's like a cosmopolitan flies. Rodents are everywhere. You can have them in islands, big continents. There are also aquatic rodents. Some of them they live in the water. Beavers are also, as I said, rodents. So I think the rodents are one of the cosmopolitan species we can say found in almost all continents. Maybe not in Antarctica. but also they are very much adaptable for variation in habitats. Like there are deserts in desert rodents, highland rodents, forest rodents, and grassland rodents. So you have them everywhere. They are everywhere. Not really only in crop fields, in cities, in sewerage areas, in storage areas, but in all kinds of habitats and ecosystems you can imagine.
What kind of reputation do rodents have in Ethiopia and elsewhere in general? When people see them, do they welcome them? Do they pet them? Do they try and feed them? Or do they drive them away?
Well, I think in most of Africa, probably most of the world, the rodents in general have a negative perception in Ethiopia. People really, some people they hate them, they dislike them. Some even fear them. So in general, there is no really nice perception or attitude towards rodents. In some cultures, like in the highlands of Ethiopia, people are really afraid of rodents. They don't even call them by name. Like you cannot say rat or ait. They would prefer to call them mushira, which means a bride. So, because this is a kind of perception where people think, okay, when you are calling a rat by name, like rat or ait, you are kind of not giving respect, and then they will avenge by consuming or by destroying your crop, by destroying your storage, your house. So it's a mixture of feelings. It's like people, they don't really understand some of the positive aspects of rodents, how they play in ecosystem functioning, ecosystem resilience, their role in food chains. These are not really, the knowledge is not there, the awareness is not there. People only consider the bad things some rodents, very few species, are doing in agriculture and health and in houses and storage areas.
Before we go further into the ecological functions of rodents, I'm sure in your research and your work across the world, you've come across more stories like the one you mentioned. Do you have any other interesting ones about the way people relate to them culturally?
There are so many different cultures. For instance, in Malawi, some people they eat rodents. Like you can find roasted rodents on the streets. You can buy, people buy and eat. On the other hand, they are very selective. In Asia, also rodents are also a delicacy, but in some places they are very selective. For instance, the story from Malawi is like rodents which are caught in urban areas. They don't eat them at all because they consider them dirty. So there are, and then I heard a professor from Greenwich University. He told me that I think he's a very well-known person, high-level scientist who has done research on rodents in Africa, Asia, in Europe for many decades. He told me that I also encountered similar experience. When he meets people in a conference, in a wedding, or in some social gatherings, and he explains to people that, I make life by doing research on rodents, and people start laughing. And similar stories, people in Ethiopia also, when we go out for doing research on rodents, with university car, government logos on the car, they say, it's okay, the government is giving you money to do research on rodents. It's really funny. So there are so many different experiences that we encounter while going out for research.
So this reputation of rodents that you spoke about, clearly it does not recognize adequately what rodents bring to the table being the ecosystem. Could you expand upon what you started to talk about in terms of how rodents help maintain the ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I can give you from Ethiopian perspective. As I said, there are more than 100 species of rodents in Ethiopia, and only maybe 12 or 15 of them are pest species. The rest are part of the ecosystem. They don't have any negative role towards human agriculture, health, nothing at all. So there are only a few species which are considered problematic for agriculture and health. So the ones which are in the wild, they feed on plant material. Some of them are herbivores. Others they dig tunnels and they burrows in the soil, so they contribute to soil nutrition, soil air circulation. So this is also very interesting ecosystem role they are playing. They also, some of them, they feed on insects, so they check some insect population from growing into crazy numbers. Some of them are seed dispersers. I mean, think what squirrels are doing, for instance, in Europe and in other parts of the world. And above all, they are food sources for many predators. I mean, many mammals, they depend for their food base on rodents. Some birds of prey, owls, for instance, and also snakes, reptiles. So they are part of the ecosystem, contributing in many ways to ecosystem services and ecosystem resilience. And as I said, most of them have these positive contributions to the environment. Only few species are responsible for damaging crops and also for transmitting diseases to humans and like that. So this perception is not really well captured by many people, regular people, policymakers, and then that's really the problem with the perception of people against, sometimes negative perception of people against rodents.
Yeah, it is nice to hear about the more positive side of these animals. But you did mention that some of them are considered pests. So how would you make that distinction? Is it because they're not naturally occurring in the area, or are they naturally occurring but more problematic than others? How would you make the distinction between pest and not pest?
Yeah, I think that's where the research comes. I think it's this is part of our job. I mean, scientists, researchers, experts. We have to be really doing a lot, not only in terms of creating awareness to farmers, regular people, policymakers, and so on, but we have to also establish clear research and information about which species are pests, which species are not, and where do these pest species occur, how are they developing into pest status, because they have to be large in number, they have to occupy some spaces which are supposed to be for another reason. And this is where the balance should be really strike in terms of their positive aspect and the negative aspect. For that matter, I will explain it later on. But also for their negative contributions, we humans are also contributing the most. So that should be really understood.
This question of rodents being pests and exactly how pesty they are, we have come to this point in the discussion because rodent communities interact with human communities. Our paths cross and the interactions are not always friendly. So why do they live amongst human communities? Or is it we who encroach upon their habitats?
I think humans are, in fact, encroaching into the rodent habitats. There are so many things that we do. We are expanding agriculture to feed the growing human population, and then we are taking the natural habitats of rodents. Urbanization is going on, again, at the expense of natural habitats where rodents are living. Deforestation is taking place all over the world, again, impacting where rodents are living, what they are eating. Overgrazing is also another problem. So there are so many activities that humans are doing which are not favoring the presence of rodents in wild habitats, rather inviting them to live with us. And then again, once they are coming into us, we continue encouraging or creating suitable conditions for rodents to live with us, like we are providing them with food, shelter, and so on. So we are, in a way, we are destroying part of their natural habitat, but creating artificial habitat, artificial conditions for them to prosper in human-dominated habitats. But once again, because we lack really the tools and knowledge to manage them. Once they are with us, we don't have a proper, a crafted way of managing their population, their presence in human habitats. So if you add all these together, it's the humans which are really contributing for the presence of rodents in human-dominated habitats.
And when humans and rodents do interact, when their paths do cross, what kind of harm do rodents do to humans?
I will divide it into two. The first and obvious is the rodent pest problems. They destroy crops in fields, in crop fields, starting from plantation or seeding stage all the way up to harvest, and then that continues once the crop is harvested and stored. So in storage, in crop fields, throughout the value chain of crop production, rodents are problematic. It's not really uncommon in many countries, for instance in Africa, in Asia also, where harvest is nearly zero, especially during outbreak seasons. It's also not uncommon to see 100% damage to stored crops or contamination. Again, in similar cases when there is rodent outbreak. So it's really, in general, some even FAO estimates between 20 to 25% production loss to agricultural crops, which is really significant. And you can imagine how much damage is really happening as a result of rodents. So the second aspect is, of course, health issues. Many reports indicate that more than 60 different kinds of diseases can be transmitted from rodents to humans, even to livestock. So some of these diseases are of viral origin, some of them are bacterial origin. There are ectoparasites that rodents are carrying, fleas and ticks and mites, which are, some of them are vectors for the disease transmission. There are endoparasites, helminths, which are carried by rodents, can also be infectious to humans and livestock. So this is another aspect of problems that could generate with the presence of rodents in human-dominated areas. I mean, the plague example in Europe is a very nice story to tell. Of course, that's a long time ago, but plague is still endemic in many African countries, also in the United States, and many people are losing lives as a result of plague. There are other hantaviruses also in South America. Lassa virus, for instance, is a good example in Africa. Pumula virus, for instance, is a very common viral disease in Europe, like in Scandinavian countries and also other parts of Western Europe. So there are diseases already present in humans as a result of the presence of rodents occurring in human-dominated habitats. So some of these diseases are persistent. They really occur. They are with humans, and some are, of course, re-emerging. They are easily transmitted from rodents to humans with food, contaminated food. Some transmissions are aerosol when you breathe a soil or a dust contaminated with rodent urine or feces. Again, and then the bites of fleas, for instance, which pick viruses from rodents, and then they transmit into humans. That's how plague is transmitted. It is transmitted through fleas jumping from rodents to humans, and so on. So even direct bites, some rodents also bite. It's a very common problem in Africa, for instance. In this way, typhus fever can be transmitted from rodents to humans. So this is the whole scenario of problems of rodents being living close to human dwellings.
For the more financially inclined amongst us, what is the cost of the harm that rodents do to us? So in terms of crop loss, in terms of the burden of disease, how many dollars and cents do we lose as a result?
I think I have to refer to for that, because I know only in Africa, for instance, crop losses are in billions. In Asia also, only in rice fields, in rice paddy fields, billions of dollars are lost as a result of rice damage during planting and also storage. So it's really a huge amount of money in terms of economic loss that's being inflicted as a result of rodent damages and economic losses.
Wow, you mentioned some really big numbers there in terms of crop losses, but also in terms of storage. You mentioned that 100% of the food in storage can be lost to rodents. Now, I'm having a bit of a hard time wrapping my head around that. I mean, rodent species are so small, and how can such small animals cause so much damage? Is it that they have such a huge appetite, or are there that many of them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, in some experimental research, it was mentioned that a rodent can feed about 10% of its body weight. So, if and then it will damage maybe 300-400 times, or 10 times, no, not 100 times, 10 times more than the amount of food it consumes per day. So let's assume that in a small holder farmer per year or per cropping season harvests about 5 or 7 quintals, and then of a maize, and then does zero management option. So if a rodent starts from consuming the maize from the bottom of polythene sack, and then maybe 1 or 2 rodent goes up from the top, and then starts discharges feces and then and urine, and it will take only few days to accumulate fungal infection. It's very easy. So it's like when we say damage is you measure the physical damage. Usually what happens is, for instance, in a maize, the rodents, they don't consume the whole maize seed, but they focus on the kernel. The kernel is the embryo part of the seed. So if the embryo is eaten, then the price is down because the nutritious part is already taken. If you want to plant that seed, it will not grow because the embryo is gone. So it's complete loss. It's a zero. It's useless. Nutritionally useless. You cannot use it for seeding for the next cropping season. And then most of it is actually contaminated by urine and feces. So the farmer cannot sell it, cannot eat it at home. So it's a wasted. So that's how it works. In outbreak season, farmers, they can lose 100% of their stored grains. I think in this junction, it's nice to mention the how we explain about damage, and then contamination, and then economic loss. So damage means the physical damage of a stored seed. And contamination is as a result of contamination of stored grain by rodent urine and feces. And economic loss is in terms of money, how much can that seed cost in terms of money in local market. So, for instance, a damaged and contaminated seed or grain will cost or very low price or no price at all. So, because when rodents drop their feces and urine in stored grain in a sack, it takes only a few days for a mold to develop. So grains with mold, with urine and smelling grain contaminated with fish, almost no one buys. It costs nothing. So that's really the distinction. And in outbreak seasons, farmers have no power at all. I mean, they have to either buy very expensive storage material, or they have to quickly sell before the damage runs into economic loss. So they have to make a decision, and this is a very risky. If they keep quiet, then they will end up with 100% loss, because all damaged, trash, stored grain with no nutritional value, no market value.
You keep mentioning outbreak season. What exactly does that mean?
So an outbreak season is some seasons where, as a result of some unknown reasons, it could be because of environmental reason, because of change in agroecology or agronomic practices, it happens that the rodent population, which is supposed to be in a normal level, spikes up, and it becomes above the carrying capacity of the environment, almost intolerable. And you see running rodents here and there, and then on the way picking seeds, picking up seedlings, and destroying everything on their way. So this is the time where we have a high number of rodent population in an area, more than the usual number, or the so-called threshold level of population. And that's a nightmare period for farmers, especially those who have no way to control them, to manage them.
Okay, so it is difficult to control rodents, to sort of manage the rodent problem. But do we have any solutions at all? Or are we completely at the mercy of rodents? What are some of the solutions going around, good or bad?
Very good question. I think for unfortunately for many poor farmers, there are only few options. In many places nowadays, chemical pesticides or rodenticides are used, which some of them or most of them are not really useful. They have many rodents have developed resistance against these chemicals, and of course the chemicals have side effects. They are killing other species, unwanted species or non-target species. They are contaminating the environment. So still, this is a big problem. But I think in the last couple of years, and the last, I would say 20 years, there is a new paradigm shift. The so-called ecologically based rodent management approach, or EBRM, is being introduced. I think it started in Southeast Asia with on rice paddy systems, introduced by Grant Singleton and Steve Bellarmine, people like Peter Brown from Australia. They are the first ones to introduce EBRM to the world. Now, people in Africa, even in Australia, are using. And this is a paradigm shift. Because why I say paradigm shift? Because EBRM actually negates the idea of using chemical rodenticides, and it encourages the use of ecological mechanisms, such as managing habitats, removing rodent shelter areas, and so on, or also introducing biological control methods. For instance, predators are a very common one, and also encouraging cultural means of controlling rodents. A lot of them. I mean, in many nations and in many countries, there are culturally developed ways of managing pests, not only rodents but also insects and other pests. There are mechanical means, some measures. but also agronomic practices and crop rotation and so on. So there are so many practices, including the use of plant-based rodenticides. In many cultures everywhere in the world, people use some plant materials, some plant itching plants, poisoning plants, deterring plants against rodents. And these plants are organic and they don't have any negative effect on the environment, on non-target species. So if you put all these together, you have an approach called ecologically based rodent management, which, as I said, doesn't really rely on the use of chemical rodenticide, which are not effective against the environment and not really working. So this is the time to expand, scale up the use of EBRM all over the world and try to manage rodents by simply developing these methods as a toolkit and then introducing into the routine rodent or pest management systems of the farmers. It doesn't really cost money. It doesn't cost any additional extra work. It can easily be inserted or incorporated into routine farming systems of farmers. I mean, this system can even work in large-scale farming system, like for companies, in warehouses, in big storage areas for agricultural companies. And as I said, the cost it incurs is very little compared to buying bad chemicals and spraying it on environment, killing non-target species, affecting humans and the environment.
There's a fair bit more to understand about ecologically based rodent management. But before that, if we could go back a bit to chemical rodenticides, we are fairly good at making toxic things that kill living organisms, so good that sometimes we make toxic chemicals and kill things without realizing or without intending to. So is the problem with chemical rodenticides that they are not toxic enough, or is there another reason why they are not effective enough as a way of rodent control?
Well, the problem with chemical rodenticides is they are being overly used in many parts of the world, and this overuse has created resistance by rodents. So, I mean, if you go around in Africa, in local markets, you see chemical rodenticides wrapped in small plastics and sold in a very cheap price, with zero instruction on how to use, how much grams or kilograms per hectare, when to use, no user instruction, no explanation at all. So it will be at the discretion of the farmer itself. If I see 2 rats in my field or in my storage, I will go buy maybe 2 strips of this rodenticide sprayed in the presence of chicken, goats, children. So zero instruction. So the use of these chemicals. On the other hand, in big private farms, like large-scale farms, the same thing happens. They just keep on spraying these chemicals and contaminating not only the food system but also the ecosystem. And then this underuse of rodenticides has created resistance, and now some species, they don't really die. Some of them they don't even consume. Whatever sweet or sour bait you mix or you use peanut butter or fish, nothing. They don't eat it. They know, they have learned, they are acquainted with the smell and everything. They don't eat it. Some of them they eat, they don't die because they have already developed resistance to it. So it's not working, honestly. I mean, everybody knows that rodenticide application is not working. That's one reason. The second, in terms of ecologically, if you explain it, you use, for instance, a rodenticide, you can kill let's say 80 to 90% of the rodents available there today or the next 3 days. After you leave the application of the rodenticide, next week 300 rodents will come back. So there will be a vacant space niche, and that will be filled with another rodent. And remember, rodents can give birth every 21 days. So it takes only 1 or 2 months to fill the whole area, which is evacuated as a result of application of. That's what we call the application of rodenticide is not sustainable. It is just temporary relief, doesn't make any permanent solution. Permanent solution is the use of ecologically based rodent management, where you manage the habitats throughout the year, throughout the cropping season, by denying rodents a shelter, by denying rodents a food, not by killing them, just deny them food and living place. You will not find them. They cannot grow without food. They cannot reproduce without food. They cannot grow in number without shelter. So they will be exposed for predators. They will be exposed for mechanical killing by human. So this is really very important to understand. I think policymakers, agricultural experts, pest management experts, they should understand that chemical rodenticide is not a lasting solution.
Sounds like the issue is quite a complicated one. From what I've seen, it does seem like these chemical rodenticides are pushed as a silver bullet, which very often does appeal to farmers and policymakers. But what you're saying is a better solution, ecologically based rodent management, doesn't seem to have the same silver bullet appeal. It sounds a fair bit more complicated. So how will you get this message out to farmers, to policymakers, where it needs to be?
Yeah, I think this is really what we have to do. I mean, if we start ecologically based rodent management at farmers level, it might not be a lasting solution. Policymakers, they have to understand, researchers, agricultural extension workers, everybody should understand that what we are providing as a solution for rodent management for farmers is not really working. It's not really working. We have to incorporate ecologically based rodent management as part of the routine crop production system. So it has to be incorporated. By the way, I would also want to mention the fact that in urban areas or suburban areas or in storage areas, it's also the same. If, for instance, if you store a food or a grain in an area where the sanitation is very poor, you have piles of garbage in your garden, it is the same. I mean, you are creating a shelter and food for rodents. And then if you keep on applying, rodenticides, chemicals, but you are not taking care of the environment, sanitation, in terms of sanitation, and clearing the area, again, it will be the same. The rodents will come back. The same is true for warehouse. In warehouses where everything is mess, then how installations, the sewerage system, the storage system is again suitable for hiding rodents, and it provides some food, they will come back. So I think there should be, that's why we have to really create awareness among policymakers, extension workers, also training farmers not really to depend on chemicals, but use this approach both in crop fields and storage areas, in households, as much as possible to deny rodents food and shelter. Otherwise, the cycle goes on. I mean, it's just an ending problem for farmers, and the suffering continues.
So far, you have spoken about a number of individual specific measures that fall under the umbrella of ecologically based rodent management. Apart from these individual steps or technologies or measures, are there also any broad principles that tie these measures together? Or is it all very site-specific?
Yes, there are general principles that need to be followed in implementing EBRM. The methodologies I mentioned, ecological measures, some biological measures, mechanical measures, cultural measures, agronomic measures, and so on. But we know that, as I said earlier, all rodents are not the same. They are different. And then, so you have to customize EBRM depending upon the rodent species. For instance, some rodents are herbivores. They eat grass or plant materials. Some of them, they only eat seeds and fruits, like squirrels, for instance. So you cannot have the same kind of EBRM for a rat feeding on rice and then a squirrel. So it's different. So it should be, the general principle is the same, but it has to be customized. And then also in terms of crop is the same, like in rice and wheat, the parts of crop damage by rodents is different from, for instance, in maize. For maize, there should be a climbing rat that goes up to the top of the maize plant. So it really varies, and it's the same in storage areas. For instance, in some countries, storage takes place. Grains are stored in polythene sack. In other places, the storage is like, for instance, in some part of Ethiopia, I think part of the other part of Africa also, pit holes are dug to store sorghum, for instance. So, and then you have granaries, like in Benin, in Niger, for instance. Benin is also the same. Granaries which are built, let's say, half a meter above the ground, but still the rodents can climb. So depending upon the storage method, the crop method, the cropping system, the rodent species, the EBRM, the basic principles will be a little bit customized. So I think if people go to the Rodent Green website, we have a manual which explains the basic principles of EBRM and how it can be customized depending upon the things that I have mentioned. So that's how it works.
Yeah, that sounds great. And from what I'm hearing, that's why you're calling it ecologically based, because you've approached these different systems by looking at them as an ecosystem with different components and rodents just being one part of this ecosystem. And then you can manipulate that to make it less.
Absolutely. I think that's a very nice point. I mean, I will just add a few examples. For instance, when you are applying EBRM in rice paddy, it will not be the same as EBRM applying in Ethiopian highlands where you have stone bunds. So it's a different system. Or when you are applying EBRM in Sahel region where you have this sandy soil. So and you don't find the rodents on the surface. They actually dig in the soil, and then they spend the whole day, because it is too hot, too warm. They cannot move around. They have to spend the day in the tunnels, and then in the evening they come out. So it's really the most important point is, I think, understanding the ecology and the agronomic system of the area to customize the EBRM interventions.
So Meheretu, you were involved in the setting up of an iteration of the EBRM process in Ethiopia. Could you tell the story of how that unfolded? Like, what did you do first, and then what happened, and then what did you do after that, and so on?
I think as part of EBRM, I should mention that in Ethiopia we developed a WhyRodenticide, a rodenticide which has a capacity of a good efficacy against rodents, and we tested it in the lab. And this WhyRodenticide is developed by mixing plant materials from two different plant species. And We did a lot of testing in the lab, confirmatory tests also in the lab, and then also partly tested in the field in the Amhara region with colleagues from Amhara Bureau of Agriculture. So like biorodenticiide is one component and one small component of EBRM. But so what we did is we also created a kind of a toolkit where we put different components of EBRM together, and then try to test its applicability in crop fields in the Amhara region, where they have watershed groups. And then so we kind of agreed with these watershed groups to try and implement part of the EBRM activities. We used some ecological management, some mechanical measure, and also included the biorodenticiide, and of course some cultural activities as well, and then open biological control system, like open area for predators to also come in and have influence on the system. So I think it's the result is very encouraging. I would say that the lab work has given excellent result. And then now the biorodenticide is being kind of produced by women groups. And then these women groups, hopefully in the coming months or so, they will start selling the biorodenticide packed in a nice way and then available on a shelf for farmers to use. But also the other parts of the ecologically based rodent management systems have also been implemented, and now the reports that we are getting is that farmers, they have really enjoyed practicing it as part of their routine agricultural system. In some watershed areas, the rodent abundance has significantly decreased, and many farmers are not complaining about rodent problems as they used to do a couple of years ago before the start of the EBRM campaigns. So if you add up these together, there is a lot of promising things, positive developments that EBRM is working, and it can be included as part of the cropping system, as part of pest management system, and then this can result in an increased production, also a healthy ecosystem, and it can significantly reduce dependency on chemical rodents that's being rampant in some parts of Ethiopia.
Okay, Meheretu, I'd like to hijack the conversation a bit for my personal gain, if that's okay. We recently managed to get a nice community allotment plot back in the Netherlands. And there is a bit of a running joke at the plot where every season we say, okay, what are we going to feed to the mice this season? Because the plot is completely overrun by mice. It's more than sharing our harvest with them. It is literally feeding them. Do you have any advice for me and my fellow allotment gardeners? How can we actually enjoy some of our produce this season?
Do what we have done for the watersheds in Amhara. You need, everybody should act. I think if you plant something in your plot, and then also apply some part of the ecologically based rodent management. For example, you clean your area, make sure that there is no hiding place, there is no food for rodents. But the guy who has a plot next to you does nothing, no rodent management practice, then it's useless, because they are going to infest your plot also. So one of the principles of ecologically rodent management is working together. All neighboring farm owners, they have to act together. That also works for urban areas, for houses, and for rural areas. It's also the same. If you have a clean garden, a clean house, no area for rodent passage, no area for rodent hiding, no food, but your neighbor has a messy, dirty, unclean, poor installations, poor housing condition, it's useless. They will come to you, because once they run out of shelter or out of food in their neighborhood, in your neighbor, they will come to you and start looking for something. So I think my advice for you is get together, try to explain about EBRM for your neighbors, for plot owners, and do something. The only thing that you can do alone is just to fence your plot, which is impractical and costly.
Okay, I will definitely make more of an effort to make friends with our neighbors then.
So, Jean, it sounds like people management is a big part of rodent management.
Yeah, it does sound like that. And at the next garden committee meeting, I will take some of these EBRM materials with me.
Thanks, Meheretu. Thanks a lot for sharing your insights, your thoughts, and your concerns. At this stage, I would like to give you a final word of sorts. If you found yourself in a lift with some of the most influential people in the world, people who are the movers and shakers of the world, people who influence agricultural policy, pest management policy, politicians who are ministers of agriculture in different countries, CEOs of agribusinesses, it's a pretty big list. It's a gigantic lift. So if you were in a lift with these people for 2 minutes, you only have enough time to give them a short message. What would that message be?
All policymakers, people in the research, companies, funding agencies, they have to really understand that rodent problem is very serious, multidimensional, as I mentioned, in agriculture, in health, in environment, and that should be understood. And second point is that there are only few species of rodents which are problematic. All rodents are not a problem. We don't need this negative conception about all rodents are bad, all rodents need to be destroyed. No, we have to be very systematic in our approach of addressing rodents which are problematic, and the rest should be there because they are very helpful for ecosystem resilience. So these are the things that I would like to explain in 2 minutes. And the solution, especially for rodent problems, we have to look for out-of-the-box type of solutions. Now, what is really happening in the world is not working. We need another look. We need another dimension. We need methods which are sustainable and have less effect on the ecosystem and the environment.
Thank you, Meheretu. Thanks for joining us today. This has been really interesting.